As we join you tonight, there is major fallout in the conservative movement following some big clashes at a key gathering of conservative voices in our nation's capital. Natcon. It's a gathering of thought leaders on the right to discuss key issues. It's usually a bit of a bore with lots of bow ties and pocket protectors, but this year things got spicy over the issue of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Curt Mills, executive director of the American Conservative, appeared in a breakout session titled America and the Israel-Iran War, a Debate. He delivered a very provocative talk named Israel First or America First. During the debate, Mills challenged the U.S.-Israel dynamic. He described Israel as, quote, perhaps the world's historic case of the tail wagging the dog, close quote. He implied that Israel's influence over U.S. foreign policy often overrides America's strategic interests. He argued that the U.S. should not treat Israel's security priorities automatically as our own. The exchange grew tense. Mills had Max Abrams in that debate and discussion, and he's a pro-Israel academic. He dismissed the realistic U.S. strategic arguments as isolationist. Abrams pushed back, labeling isolationist realists as insane. We disagree with that. Yoram Hazani is Natcon's founder and a staunch supporter of Israel. He watched the debate and later warned that such internal divisions, especially over Israel, could fracture the broader nationalist movement if not handled carefully. The session revealed a growing ideological fault line within the nationalist conservative movement. On one side, Mills and like-minded realists push for a more restrained sovereignty-first foreign policy. On the other, traditional supporters like Abrams and Hazani advocate for continued robust U.S. alignment with Israel. Hazani signaled that the debate was permitted, not suppressed, yet he cautioned that unchecked dissent could harm political figures aligned with the coalition like J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio and even threaten the larger America First project. Mills emphasized he wasn't discussing tactics but strategy. He questioned why America adopts Israel's conflicts as its own when doing so is often in conflict with our national interests. Curt Mills used his Natcon platform to forcefully argue that American foreign policy should prioritize U.S. sovereignty and strategic interests, not those of its allies. The debate with Max Abrams illuminated a growing divide within the movement over the U.S.-Israel relationship. The split is now more visible than ever. Curt Mills is with us now. So you gave a provocative talk at Natcon. What was the main message you wanted to convey to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, it was a group that was gathered to talk about the intellectual underpinnings, I think, that have inspired President Trump's movement the last 10 years. And I just sort of laid down the gauntlet and said, although the U.S. and Israel can have coordinating interests, that their interests are not the same. And if there is ever a choice between America and Israel, it's not a close call.
And when you offered this just absolutely hyperbolic theory that we're two separate countries with two separate sets of interests, how was that received?
I think there was a divide within the audience. I think there were a group of, if I may speculate, older Americans in the front row who cheered for my opponent, frankly. And then the vast majority of the room was younger, and by younger I mean under 50. And the reception towards my message was pretty rapturous.
And what do you think drives that generational divide on this question?
I mean, I'm born in 1990, so the formative experience was the Iraq War, the 2000s. But I think even for the generation younger than me, so the Zoomers, people born after 2010, even, I mean, these people are online. This stuff seems so unbelievably anathema to what anything could be called America First, that it's not even rooted in experience. It's just so obvious that U.S. involvement in the Middle East on behalf of Israel is not something that the U.S. should be doing.
So one of the organizers, founders of this conference, was quick to pat himself on the back for allowing the debate, but also proffered this theory that the divide on the Israel question really could threaten the utility of the conservative movement, the America First movement, and really we all ought to figure out a way to not have that happen. I've been very involved in this debate, and I don't get the sense that it's that way from the realism side. Like, I don't believe people who are pro-Israel should be driven out of the church. Like, maybe you don't let them preach the sermon at the front, but I don't know that they're like to be shunned and cast away. Do you get the sense that it's the same on the converse side, where how the pro-Israel groups kind of think about the message you were conveying?
No, I mean, look, first of all, I have to thank Mr. Zoni for having me. But and so far as I gather from his opening statement, I'm not really sure what he was offering. Hazoni is an Israeli. And, I do know that he is a former staffer for the now Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. And if his offer is get in line and do whatever the Netanyahu administration de jure, wants, that's not much of an offer. If the I think this is what the frustration here is there's not actually much of a coalition here. The No matter what Republican candidates talk about in every election cycle, it seems like the ones who get the policy wins are the people who want the tax cuts, never mind how we pay for them, and new wars in the Middle East. Everything else seems very, very tertiary.
And do you think that is a consequence of people who embrace foreign policy realism having a challenge getting credentialed by some of these gatherings, organizations, and think tanks?
To an extent, but I actually think there's a real counter elite on foreign policy if an administration wants to plug them in. And so, yeah, I think there are, John Mearsheimer is obviously the most famous realist going, but there are a ton of people who are not household names that could staff an administration. And so, yeah, I'm not so sure it's a platforming issue as much anymore. Ron Paul, the heroic former congressman, presidential candidate, also covered this event and talked about my address earlier today, and he said there really is, it was sort of fun for him to say it, a vibe shift going on where the reality is they can't deplatform us because it would look so ridiculous.
So what should be our offer to them? Like, what offer can foreign policy realists make to the Israel First crowd to say, look, you probably align with our border policies, with some of our economic policies, our regulatory policies. Don't allow the fact that we want to have the type of friendship where you can be honest with your friends and critical of your friends, and we think those folks should stay aligned with the conservative movement.
I mean, I think there should be a beautiful divorce. I don't think the U.S. should be funding Israel's military, and I don't think Israel should be funding the America's military. And I think from there, you can have an actual alliance of where interests intersect that we can partner. But the U.S. is an enormous contributor to Israel's military, and the U.S. constantly provides diplomatic cover to the Israeli government. That's the big one. I mean, the State Department itself is trying to bar Palestinian representatives, successfully trying to bar Palestinian representatives from coming to the UN. Now, look, you don't have to be a huge fan of the UN, but it's probably not going anywhere, and it's probably not leaving New York City. And the idea that the State Department should spend 1 second of its political capital or attention on doing the bidding of a foreign government as opposed to pressing America's case at the UN, I think is a joke.
I do want to spend a moment to reflect on where you think the left is on this question. Like you were at the center of this debate and how the right is confronting it, but there is a similar confrontation going on the left. Who do you think ultimately prevails out of that?
I think that the Democrats are moving away from Israel. Or at least this current Israeli government. I think it's also a generational story, but I think this is the reality. I mean, I think the Netanyahu address to Congress in 2015, where basically most members of Congress clapped like seals for a foreign government. I think that was a seminal moment because the critique of Netanyahu 10 years ago was this: if Netanyahu sided with one party, as he did, he sided with the Republican Party against Barack Obama, say what you will, he would risk losing both parties within a generation. And I think it's complex on both sides. It depends who the standard bearer is in 2028. But you saw, Pete Buttigieg is probably a fairly serious presidential candidate. He gave a garbled, horrendous answer on Israel policy questions, and he got absolutely clobbered. So you're going to need someone either more sophisticated or more hardline on this question. And I think I think this is going to spill out into 2028. People talked about this issue like, the Republicans might turn on Israel 5, 10, 15 years. I think this is coming in the presidential primary in 28. I think it's a big issue, especially if the war is going on.
And so let's forecast the 2028 presidential debate stage between the ultimate Republican nominee and the ultimate Democrat nominee. Which one do you think is most willing to prostrate themselves for the interests of Israel over the United States?
I mean, that's an possible situation. It depends, who the nominee is on each side. If it's
Well, of course. That's why I'm asking you to prognosticate
I'm not
for
going to
us.
predict. I'm not sure I'm going to predict that. I think we know a lot of the people who are going to be on the stage in 28, so I don't want to preemptively offend anybody here. But I think there's a real chance, though. Here's what I'll say. The Republicans have a less of a sort of humanitarian right as opposed to the humanitarian left. And so if the Republicans break the link with Israel, I think it's going to be unsentimental versus the left will always be sort of dogged by, this sort of argument that we need to do X for X foreigner or Y foreigner. Not that there's no argument towards it, but it's less likely to have currency. I think there's is a real fight also within the American Jewish community itself, and 2/3 of American Jews vote Democratic. And so I think if that debate could be more protracted, I know it seems very contrarian, but the break on the right could happen quicker.
Curt Mills has called for a beautiful divorce and this type of an unsympathetic separation. Curt Mills, the executive director of the American Conservative, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.